My name is Danielle Gerard. I am currently First Vice President. I regret to inform you that Lorraine has a family emergency and will not be running the meeting tonight, which would have been her last meeting, so we will celebrate her later. We have two really terrific speakers tonight. One of them is already here, so we're going to get started. We have a pretty packed agenda. We have Lauren Melodia from the New School. We have Lincoln Mitchell, who has spoken with us before. We have a couple of videos and songs that Steve has gathered for us to improve our mood, given the current situation that we have to wake up to every day. We have presentations by the Board of Directors of Three Parks Independent Democrats, because we will be voting on a new slate. Later on this evening, you'll hear a 59-second presentation from each board member about who they are and how they would love to have your support. But I would like to start the meeting with all of you giving yourselves a round of applause for being here, for doing the work you do, and for just being all around great advocates. I am going to tell you first and foremost about our first speaker, who is Lauren Melodia. She is the Deputy Director of Economic and Fiscal Policy at the Center for New York City Affairs at the New School. She is an economist with research interests in feminist economics and the interaction between macroeconomic and local economic policy. Lauren brings over 15 years of experience in policy advocacy and research, organizing, and coalition building to her role at the Center at the New School. Prior to joining the Center, Lauren worked at the Roosevelt Institute providing research and data analysis on the COVID-19 economic recovery, inflation, and fiscal and monetary policy at the national level. Lauren has presented her work to the U.S. Joint Economic Committee, the House Financial Services Committee, the Congressional Progressive Caucus, the New York Legislature, and the New York City Council. Her writings on the state of the economy have been published in multiple publications, including The Nation and Ms. Magazine, The Washington Post, Boo, and the New York Daily News. Prior to working as an economist, Lauren worked at the crossroads of economic justice and criminal legal reform. Please give it up for Lauren Melodia. Thank you for coming. You can sit here. That might, yes, you'll be much more comfortable like that.
Okay. Can you hear me? Yeah? Okay. Thanks so much for having me. These are really crazy times. I'm here to tell you a little bit about what's happening in the New York City and New York State economy in this new era of Trump, and kind of what's happening in Albany and City Hall as we're thinking about policy solutions to some of these crises. There's so many topics to cover just within those themes, and I want to try to keep my remarks as brief as possible. Let me get a timer out. Because I'm sure a lot of you have questions, and I will do my best to answer as many of them as I can. At our center, we've been monitoring what's happening in the local economy for a long time. The Center for New York City Affairs actually predates the existence of the New School. And my predecessor in my position, James Parrott, spent over 3 decades kind of analyzing the New York City economy and centering the lives of people who work and live in New York City, not just Wall Street. We did a lot of kind of rapid response analysis during COVID, and now we're back into kind of that rapid response mode, unfortunately, because things are changing all the time. But I think before kind of launching into what's happening with how the federal government is impacting the New York City economy, I want to kind of provide a little bit of context of what's happening in the New York City economy in general. Because what's happening in the economy influences what kind of economic policies you need. And so I kind of want to set us up with actually the 10 years before COVID. New York City had over 10 years of expansion, which was the longest growth period it had had in a really long time. And that 10-year period of economic growth, coupled with local policy that doubled the minimum wage from 2013 to 2019, brought more consumer spending and growth to the point that on the eve of the pandemic, New York City's economy was stronger than it had ever been by some measures. We had the lowest unemployment rate in recorded New York City history. Now that recorded New York City history only goes back to 1976, but still the lowest on record, 3.8%. We're at 5.4% right now, just to give you some context. And it's not to say that the economy was perfect here, but we know that the economy can grow and it can retract and it can include, it can be inclusive and it can be exclusive. And so it's important to kind of keep in mind where we were before the pandemic, that kind of potential that we had that we can actually surpass if we have the right economic policies in place. And so this week we celebrate 5 years since the COVID shock, actually. And so we've been recovering from that ever since. In the past year, we had better economic growth in terms of payroll jobs than the U.S. economy had, which was great because it has been really slow here. But it doesn't kind of make up for the more severe economic shock and the lagged economic recovery that the city had from COVID. The U.S. economy now boasts 4.4% more non-farm payroll jobs than it did before the pandemic. New York City's only surpassed pre-pandemic non-farm job levels by 1.1%. So we haven't grown as much as the national economy. But the most important thing I want to bring up is where jobs have come back in the economy, because nationally we've seen kind of economic growth happening across the board in all industries, some more than others. In New York City, we've seen a very, very different dynamic. So nationally, only 2 industries have experienced any job decline since COVID. In the city, most industries have seen a decline in payroll jobs that they provide, some by double-digit percentages. These include construction, manufacturing, retail trade, information. All of these industries have seen double-digit percentage decline in payroll jobs in the city. And meanwhile, the only significant job growth we've seen is in healthcare and social assistance, with some small gains in some high-wage sectors like finance and insurance. So before the pandemic, 17.5% of payroll jobs in New York City were in health and human services. Now, 1 in 5 payroll jobs in New York City is in this industry. And this is important as we're thinking about what's going on with the Trump administration and how it impacts our economy. Because we've seen this slow recovery from COVID and this kind of reshuffling of what the economy looks like in terms of its kind of industrial distribution of jobs, we've also seen dramatic, uneven growth in who's benefiting from this recovery. And so at the end of last year, we published a report, kind of an economic and fiscal policy outlook for 2025, and maybe the club can share the link later. I didn't have a chance to print out copies before coming here. But in it, we kind of look at unemployment, labor force participation of different demographic groups in the city. We look at age, race, we look at educational attainment level. And across the board, what we see is real uneven economic gains. Men of color have experienced significant declines in their unemployment rates. Black men have one of the highest unemployment rates in the city right now at 10.7%, but it's not just black men, it's all men of color have seen increased unemployment, and now we're starting to see decreased labor force participation, meaning that people are giving up even trying to find a job because they've been having such a hard time in this post-COVID economy here in New York City. Young people 18 to 24 have the highest unemployment rate in the city right now at 13.6%. They've also seen the largest increase in their unemployment rate. Different groups have different unemployment rates, and so it's not just who's got the highest one right now, but what does it look like compared to what they looked like before. Young people 18 to 24 have seen the highest increase in their unemployment rate in the city. And what we've seen in terms of favorable labor market outcomes, they're primarily concentrated amongst people who are highly privileged in New York City. That's white workers, that's people with a bachelor's degree. Comparing before the pandemic and to the present moment, we've seen that white women have seen a 5.2% increase in their employment rate. That's amazing. But we want to make sure that that happens for everybody. So we're seeing this real uneven kind of distribution of economic gains here in the city. Alongside all of that, we're also seeing rising wage inequality. We just published a blog post last week that shows that the top 3% of wage earners in the city have seen 30% real wage growth in the post-pandemic period, while most people are pretty flat, if they're keeping up with inflation, at best. We've also seen rising poverty, not surprising. Today, almost a quarter of children in New York City live at the federal poverty line, and 1/3 of the city's population live under 200% of the federal poverty line. And so along with that, what we have is rising demand for public assistance. This is another thing when we get to kind of what's happening in economic policy. There's really, really strong demand for Medicaid, SNAP, and cash assistance. Not only have we seen Medicaid enrollment since COVID grow by 15.2%, SNAP enrollment by 20%, but cash assistance, people who get temporary assistance from the city, which is actually a really hard program to get qualified for, we've seen that those cash assistance rolls rise 76.2% since before the pandemic. So we've got a lot of need here in the city, a lot of inequality. And now I gotta find the next page here. Okay. So the New York State Division of the Budget, they've been looking at what's been happening in the economy, what do we expect to happen in the future. They're not even taking Trump into consideration in some of the documents that they've been publishing recently. They're anticipating continued slow growth. We will see growth, but it will be slow. And we know from looking at history, slow growth doesn't really transform any of the things that I'm talking about. Strong, fast economic growth is what you need to really bring gains for people who are most disadvantaged in the economy. And we're expecting slow growth at best. So that means that the things that we're seeing right now, we're going to continue to see. We're going to see disparity in labor market outcomes by race, by education status, by age. We're going to see high poverty and high need for public assistance. And so in that kind of economy, we as economists are thinking about what kind of economic policies fit that kind of situation. What we need is public investment. We need fiscal policy to stimulate the economy, to bring back jobs by growing the MTA capital budget, to be able to enact its plan, by implementing all of the proposals that we got federal funding for with the Inflation Reduction Act. These are the kinds of things we want to see in the city to stimulate more economic growth and make sure it's more inclusive of the people who are still left behind and still dislocated from the COVID pandemic. That's not what we're seeing right now, right? We've got the Trump administration coming in, clawing back a significant amount of funding. We can go into all of the different details of which funding streams are going to impact the city the most. But I think it's important to understand kind of what the economy looks like, because for the most part, most of the federal money that we get, it doesn't go to the city's education budget. It goes to people in need. It goes to Medicaid, it goes to SNAP, it goes to cash assistance. Those are programs that have high need. We know that some of the demand for medical services comes from people having access to insurance. I mentioned that 1 in 5 payroll jobs in the city is in healthcare and social assistance right now. If we see a clawback in Medicaid, if we see cuts to Medicaid, it not only impacts the people who are in need, but it also impacts, what undergirds our economy, this industry that we're really heavily invested in here in New York City. On the flip side, I can say that one of the things that we know is central to the New York City economy is Wall Street. And Wall Street has been having record profits, which is making it so that the city and the state have good tax revenue to be spending right now. And we want to make sure that they spend it wisely. I think one of the things that we're concerned about in Albany, and I can answer any questions people have about kind of what policies are on the table right now. The state Senate and Assembly just put out their one House bills on Monday, kind of responding to the governor's budget. We started having city hall hearings about the mayor's budget. For the most part, we don't really see Albany taking a wise approach to dealing with that money that they've got in the bank. They've got surplus this year. They're looking to give it away in terms of tax cuts. They may be progressive tax cuts, the inflation refund check. I think most economic policy analysts in the city are very concerned about this because it won't really address the problems that the city is facing. And yet it also reduces the amount of revenue we have to kind of fill in the gap of what we expect, to see more of with the Trump administration, which is doing their best to claw back as much funding as possible, and in the process slowing down the access that the city has to those resources. Hopefully we'll be able to win in courts, anything that they might throw in the way of trying to dismantle the federal funding that we have access to. But even slowing it down, we really do need the city and the state to be thinking about using whatever surplus they have right now to support those social assistance programs, to make sure that our education system is running well, that we can, cover the MTA capital budget to get the public transportation system working better in light of kind of the things that we expect the Trump administration to claw back. I think that I'm kind of at time, so maybe I'll just leave it at that. Okay. Sure. Let's see. There are a lot of things happening in Albany that I think are important for people to know. I think a lot of effort has been put on what I would say are these neoliberal kind of tax policy initiatives, even if they're coming from progressive Democrats. They're still not addressing really the challenges that we're seeing here. But there are some things that are kind of like on the line. They're not talking about housing in Albany right now, even though we know that they need to be. We do have the opportunity, we had the congestion pricing amended, so we don't have the MTA capital budget fully funded. This is something that Albany can step in to deal with right now. We've got unprecedented reserves and a surplus in Albany. If they were to fully commit to funding the capital plan, then that would just produce so many more good-paying jobs in New York City to produce those outcomes for the city and improve the lives of New York City residents writ large. So I would really encourage you all to really make sure that the state legislature include fully funding the MTA capital plan in their proposals this year. I think everybody, there's been a lot of critique of things like the Inflation Reduction Credit. I think that there's a lot of support for the child tax credit expansion. The Senate is thinking about the working families tax credit. Both are good. Like if we're going to do anything around tax policy in New York State, that would be where I think most economic policy analysts would recommend putting money. One of the last things that I'll mention is just childcare. We have an affordability crisis in New York City. I do a lot of research on childcare policy at our center. 50% of the Administration for Children's Services budget here in New York City comes from federal funding, and it's the federal funding that subsidizes childcare for families that are at 85% of area median income, as well as extended day, extended year, 3K and pre-K slots. It's really important for making childcare affordable for a lot of people in New York City. And not only do we maybe need to be concerned about the fact that the federal government might try and reduce money from that block grant, but right now we actually don't have the state allocating enough money to New York City to maintain the amount of assistance that it's currently providing to families. So this is another one. The state and the assembly are trying to address it in their one House bills, and I think it's important for us to all kind of get behind making sure that they make sure we can stabilize affordable child care here in the city for the foreseeable future. With additional funding to meet the existing roles on that one. I'll stop there. and see if anyone has any particular topics that they want to talk about.
Hi. COVID led to the phenomenon of the work from home situation, which I think is probably, and you can confirm this, heavily biased towards upper income people with college degrees. It's also a tremendous benefit for families with children because it greatly reduces your commuting time to drop your kids off at daycare, at school, pick them up from after school, etc. So could you please say a few words about what the work from home economy has meant for different demographics within the city and what you think the future is there?
Well, I think you've said what we need to hear about the impact on different demographics. It has skewed and benefited primarily college-educated white households more so than others because of just racial and gender occupational segregation, which is just a feature of the American economy. Different types of people kind of work in different types of occupations. And so I think that, on some level, like I think you've already said what we already know about it, that it has disproportionately benefited some people. I think the problem in New York City is that our economic development strategies in the city are still focused on making sure that people come back to work. Like, I have gone to conferences recently where business leaders have said, we will bring people back to work 5 days a week. And I think it's unrealistic to assume that that's going to happen. And for the most part, we've seen that the spillover economic activity that we had in Midtown and the financial district from people coming to work in those areas every day, work in cafes and restaurants and bars, that work still exists in the city. It's just in the outer boroughs now. It's just where people are working from home. So in some ways, I think work from home is going to be a facet of our lives. We should figure out how to make sure that there's equity there. I mean, I know some companies and nonprofits are actually giving people a bonus if they have to work in person 5 days a week because it's unfair compared to other people who have an occupation where they don't have to come in 5 days a week. That seems like a good equity policy. But I think also we need to come up with other economic development strategies for the city that aren't just, if we have 9 to 5 workers every day in Manhattan, the city's economy will somehow magically work perfectly for everyone. Because that wasn't a good strategy before, and it's certainly not a realistic one now.
I would like to ask, wait for the mic. I didn't hear that. I am so sorry. Yes, a wonderful presentation. I would just be very curious to see and find out what your opinion of Eric Adams is in all of this mix.
Okay, that's a loaded one. Huh? Not here? Well, part of the reason I really wanted to come present here is I haven't been to a Democratic Club meeting like this before, and I'm curious what kind of discourse you guys have about these things. So I'd be curious to hear what you all think about it. But certainly the city is, at a disservice with our current mayor. I mean, just right now, this issue around the child care money, not having enough money in the state budget, is that's just one of many, many, many examples where the city does not have the leadership or the capacity to even negotiate for us in Albany. They just have been completely MIA and through the budget process, and so now we have agency staff who don't have an idea of the big picture, running to the governor's office saying we're not going to have enough money for childcare. So I think clearly we need new leadership here in the city, and I'm excited to see what happens in the next couple of months.
Thank you. Hi. I know that Medicare for All has been an issue in Albany for about 20 years. I don't know the percentage, the details, but I assume that there would still be in the plan some contribution from the federal government during the 20-year span that it's been discussed in Albany. Now we know there won't be a penny from Washington. Is that program just done with? or even discussed at all, Medicare for all?
I mean, right now, I think what they're trying to do in Albany and the city is maintain the services we have, and they're kind of keeping blinders on about what could potentially happen with, any federal cuts, big or small. The biggest part of New York State's budget is our Medicaid budget and all of the different components of it. The state matches that money, but, right now, if you look at what we're reliant on for programs like that, we don't have enough reserves or any kind of emergency revenue plans on the table to fill the gap there. So I think that's one of the biggest concerns. It's really absurd to me that we see so many kind of proposals for tax cuts right now. I guess people think it's a politically popular idea to deliver tax cuts to people, but I think people, I don't know, I would argue most people would prefer to maintain the benefits that they have.
Hi. Are you aware of the I Own Investor Now New York coalition that's campaigning in Albany for 5 tax proposals to tax the super wealthy? What is the chances, what's your comment on that, those proposals that are being floated and pushed heavily, lobbied by this group?
Well, interestingly, the governor's budget does include extending some taxes on the wealthy, but she does it very quietly. And so, that is one of the reasons we have a surplus right now, that there has been this post-COVID kind of extension of taxes on wealthier New York State residents. Though I feel like I don't know all of the Ione proposals by heart, but I do know that the Senate and the Assembly snuck in some additional tax increases in their budgets. And, if there's any year to consider them, it would be now. I think that there's always this concern that there's no political, that it's, politically unfavorable. But right now we're about to see an extension of the 2017 tax cuts, which are going to put many, many wealthy people who live in New York State, they're going to have fewer taxes at the federal level. This is the opportunity for the state to kind of enact some of those bold proposals. Whether or not they make it beyond like the initial one House bills is another thing, but I think that, this is certainly the time to be really pushing for them.
Just a quick comment on the Medicare for All question. Being co-chair of the Medicare Healthcare Committee of the club, the club...
Do you want to use this one?
That was the protest.
What did you say, sir?
Repeat.
Do you want to use this mic?
It's not that mic. Did you have a mic? Yeah, all right.
I
That's
have it
the
now.
mic over there. That's the problem. I started to say, as co-chair of the healthcare committee, the club has endorsed Medicare for All, and we watch that carefully, and we're always looking for an opportunity to move that forward. The plan has never been that the federal government would subsidize it. The plan has always been that federal programs, Medicare, Medicaid, Veterans Administration, and so on, would be rolled into it, and that money would come. That will probably never happen under a Trump administration. Dick Gottfried, who's the author of the bill, says that the plan can work all right without that people who are under Social Security and the VA and so on would just stay there. And the other people would be covered. There's no additional money, right? What happens is that your private insurance premiums now would be collected by the state in the form of taxes, and so the plan is self-funding in that respect. So it is by no means dead. It shouldn't be considered dead because we have Trump.
But why do you think that it can't happen during the Trump administration? Do you think that they would block it?
Oh, I'm sure they would block rolling Medicare and Medicaid into the state plan. In fact, they're going to probably try to abolish all of those things anyway. It may well be that Medicare for All is all we're going to have by the time this is over.
Can I?
Shoshana?
Oh.
Oh, I'm sorry, Alex. Go ahead. Alex.
With the federal government having all these crazy ideas of, and this is about taxes. No taxes on tips, no taxes on overtime. How is the state going to coordinate its tax system with the federal government? You know, so is the state still going to be taxing tips and overtime? And you know, how are you going to be able to coordinate that if that actually happens?
Yeah, great question. We had someone on our team testify at City Council's Finance Committee last week on this topic, because there are, I think all of those proposals, if they are implemented, in order for the city and the state to retain the ability to tax those things, it's going to create a much more complicated tax collection process. So there's a challenge there. I don't think that it doesn't have to be one way or the other, but there's consequences, you know, certainly if the city and state want to continue to tax those things. And the I mean, I think these are some of the things we have to seriously consider. You know, the way that income is taxed in the United States for a lot of people is on their paychecks. We have a standard amount taken out for Medicaid and Social Security. Like, we don't get to adjust that. Will there be I mean, I don't think that the federal government would be open to renegotiating that. But I do think right now we do need to think kind of very carefully and boldly about what to do about tax collection. I mean, the state typically we send more money to Washington than we get back typically. And so in the face of real serious cuts, you know, we might need to make some bold changes and take some action to try and adjust that so that people can have their taxes go to the programs that I think, you know, we all expect the U.S. government should have for people.
Last question from Shoshana.
Hi. So this is a cost of living question. So as we all know, groceries have gotten very, very expensive. And to comfortably, like a 30% of your income afford an average apartment in New York City, you would need to make like $45 an hour. Is there a plan on the state level to address like wage disparity to stimulate economic growth? And if there isn't, what kind of legislation being proposed addresses that issue?
Wage disparity?
Yeah.
Yeah, great question. I mean, I think one of the challenges, so when we had the Fight for 15 in New York City, the idea was that it was really going to impact a lot of jobs that exist in the private sector. So private firms were going to have to bear the cost of paying their workers more. Now we have kind of a complicated situation. 1 in 5 payroll jobs in healthcare and social assistance, so many of those jobs are funded through Medicaid, funded through the Child Care Block Grant, funded through city contracts. And so we've seen, our organization has been working a lot in recent years to try and boost wages in some of those industries where we've seen that people aren't making as much as their peers with the same level of education in different industries, or people in the nonprofit sector are making less than people with the same job in the state or city government. And one of the things that we keep encountering again and again is that the state government and the city government say, we don't have any money to pay people anymore. So I think that that's one of the challenges and why we need to really think about some long-term revenue-raising plans for the city and the state, not just because of what might happen at the federal level, but also because if we want to raise wages for people, it's been like in those industries, which I think is where a lot of people have recommended putting the most effort right now. It will have the most kind of equity impact in terms of race and gender. We have so many people of color, so many women of color working in all of those sectors that I just mentioned that have not seen wage growth because of the fact that their wages depend on things being negotiated during the budget period. So I think that in order to actually really get the conversation going, we need to have the city and state come together to develop a revenue-raising plan to fund those wage increases.
Yeah. Thank you.
Let's give it up to Lauren.
Thank you so much, you guys.
Thank you so much. That was really, really deep and not as depressing as it could have been. So thank you very much. Thank you very much. Next up, we have Lincoln Mitchell, who has been with us before. We're thrilled to have him back. Lincoln is a political analyst, pundit, and writer based in New York and San Francisco, and teaches in the Political Science Department and School of International and Public Affairs at Columbia. He's written for CNN Opinion, NBC News, the San Francisco Examiner, numerous other publications. He's also written 8 books on topics ranging from democratic development in the former Soviet Union, to urban politics in the United States, to baseball. Let's give it up for Lincoln Mitchell.
Forgive me for just a moment of self-promotion. I've actually written 9 books. My 9th book will be out in a couple of weeks. It's called, it's a biography of George Moscone. It's called 3 Years Our Mayor, George Moscone and the Making of Modern San Francisco. So if you're interested in urban politics, San Francisco political history, I would urge you to check it out. Yeah, I will try here. I will urge you to check it out. And also, if you want more of my writing, you can subscribe to my Substack, Kibitzing with Lincoln. It is always good to be here because I spend way too much time inside my head thinking about these things, and then I get to do media appearances where either you're asked just absurd questions or you don't have enough time, and then I teach a lot, but I have to kind of have a veneer which is extremely difficult of not telling the truth about the Republican Party, because to do that would make me seem like a left-wing partisan nut, and I don't really, that may be a good way that should probably be in my bio as well. But I want to begin here. The question I want to address today is essentially, what are we going to do? And I get asked this a lot. And the first thing I say is truthful is, I don't know. Second thing I say, which unfortunately is also truthful, is that if I did know, I would write it up, it would be ignored for about a year and a half, somebody less famous than me would come up with an idea that wasn't quite as good, and would become even more famous. So you're already getting a sense of the optimism and upbeat spirit that I'm going to bring to today's talk. Before I do that, I just want to say that the first time Trump got in, I think we were all aware of this problem of democratic rollback. And there was this sense of democracy is being destroyed. But now it is extremely important to look at where this is going. And I'm not going to address this right now because we don't have enough time, but I would urge you to look into this. And I would specifically point you to the literature and the writings on the network state. So go read Balaji Srinivasan's very strange website and book called The Network State. Go read Mark Andreessen's Kaczynski-esque rant about techno-optimism. If you don't want to torture yourself, I suggest you check out the writing of Gil Duran, who writes at a place called The Nerd Reich and has a podcast, and he breaks this down. But where these cryptogonists and techno-fascists want to take this is very important, and it can't be ignored. And that is about what I have to say about that now because of time constraints. But now I'm going to move into this, and I should say that if you don't catch all of this, there is a cheat sheet that we will hand out at the end. Yeah, we're going to wait till the end. But what do we do? And I think we can't address that until we ask one big picture question. And that big picture question is this normal? And I want to flesh out what I mean by that. What I mean by that is what the Trump-Musk regime is doing in Washington, is this just normal stuff that any Republican regime would do, and that most of us here as kind of progressive Democrats don't like because we're Democrats and some of us identify as progressive Democrats. But is it just normal? So if it is normal, I don't have a cheat sheet for this, but we could talk about the Democratic Party theory of change. And the Democratic Party theory of change goes something like this. The price of eggs increases. MAGA voters encounter economic hardship. And then here in blue, a miracle occurs. Democrats win in 2026 and 2028. Democracy is restored. So, if you believe the answer to the is that normal question is yes, then the strategy lies almost entirely in elections, and it relies on winning in 2026 and 2028. And I have three things here in the cheat sheet that help us understand that. What can we do? Well, we can contribute money to the Democratic Party. I'm sure many of you have no opportunities to do that because the Democratic Party isn't good at reaching out and asking people for money. But you could do that. Secondly, something to do with eggs. I don't know, but I don't really like eggs, and I'm feeling a little bit out of it because for me, it just doesn't matter. My kids eat a lot of eggs, but I don't. But somehow eggs are central to this. Maybe we throw them at I don't know. And then, I have to say, I think when we have districts nearby, we can go there and volunteer. I spent the last 5 days of the election in 2024 in Wisconsin, in a kind of southern rural Wisconsin, and you'd be surprised just how powerful it is when a left-wing, overeducated Jew from New York knocks on those people's doors, right? So I'm really not so optimistic about that. I waited a long time, so I'm a little bit, it's going to just past my bedtime. And then there's this whole discussion going on about what is strategy, who should we nominate, what's the magic formula. If you think we can do this with just elections, participate in that conversation. Now, if you think the answer to is this normal is in fact no, congratulations, because you are living in reality. And we have to figure out what we're going to do. What do we do when we know that in our heart elections are not enough? And I would just posit this. I've worked on politics all around the world. People laughed at and got angry at me in February of 2017 when I wrote that Trump wouldn't leave office if he loses. I have a little bit of a sense of what we're up against here. And let me tell you this. Regimes like this rarely allow free and fair and democratic elections, and they don't leave office just because they lose them. So, with that in mind, I'm going to say that elections are necessary but not sufficient. They are one of the 7 strategies. So first thing here, we have to begin winning elections, obviously, but very importantly, we have to recognize that the challenge is not just winning elections. The challenge is ensuring they are free and fair and democratic, and that is not going to be easy. We haven't heard a lot about voter suppression, but it's going to get worse. The threats against voters, the intimidations, the violence, the legal means they will use, the control they have over the major media platforms. And here I'm thinking about Meta and X. The fight to have free and fair and democratic elections is as important as the fight to win them. And we have to approach elections with that in mind. Now, my working strategy here is that the tools that you use to win in democracy are not the same tools you use to bring down a fascist regime. And I don't use that term lightly, and it took me a long time to get there, but that is what we are up against. Again, I'm seeing your faces, and I know that I keep getting invited back from my relentless optimism, but I'm going to keep going here. So the second thing we need to think about is legal strategies, right? We are winning some of these battles in the courts every day, and we should continue to fight those fights in the courts. However, and there's always a however, when you push something up the court system, or when you get to the very, very most important cases, it ends up in the Supreme Court. Now, Chief Justice Roberts is fond of saying that the role of the courts is to call balls and strikes. Call balls and strikes. And I want to ask a question. because it wouldn't really be a Lincoln Mitchell talk if we didn't talk a little baseball. How many of you played baseball at a level in high school or beyond? Okay. How many of you think of yourselves as baseball fans? Okay, good. Good. Much higher percentage than any class I teach. What do you say about an umpire calling balls and strikes? They all have their own strike zone, right? Every umpire has their own strike zone. And at the end of the day, the Supreme Court strike zone is a pretty pro-Trump strike zone. So the courts aren't going to save us either. So now we get to the fun part. And I want to say now something important that I should have said earlier. I don't have the answers. What I have and what I will hand out in my cheat sheet is a framework for thinking about the answers. The frames that we need to have to get to the answers. The areas in which we need to be working. So the next one is media. And as I said earlier, Meta and X have become fonts of right-wing disinformation. Much of the kind of legacy mainstream media has capitulated in frankly shameful ways. The New York Times, if Donald Trump, suspended Congress, it would say Donald Trump's bold strategy on legislation, right? Every headline is toned down, and they are unwilling to reckon with reality. What this means is that we have to begin to think about ways that we are going to get and transmit information. We have to figure out which media platforms and news sites we can trust and which are going to conceal the truth from us. Which ones, and that may mean looking, and I'm going to get back to this topic in a second, looking outside of the United States. It may mean looking at media platforms in other countries who can tell the truth about the United States. But we have to begin to do that. I am saddened by the people I see who still say, did you see this opinion piece by David Brooks in the New York Times? People who are Democrats. Did you see this editorial in the New York Times? The New York Times is bringing a sternly worded editorial to a gunfight. And we cannot fall into that trap. So the third thing we have to do has to do with media. The fourth thing, and here where I confess my deep ignorance, is tech. Technology. Tech. And we know that to a great extent, I mean, it was not that long ago when there was this tech will liberate us, right? I was involved in projects in other countries, like explaining social media to democracy activists, right? Remember the Twitter revolution in Iran and all of this? It's not the world we live in anymore. We all know that this community has moved largely into the Trump-Musk camp. And that doesn't just include the Peter Thiels and the J.D. Vances and the Eli Musks and the Mark Zuckerbergs, but it's also people we haven't always heard of. It's Gary Tan, it's Balaji Srinivasan, and we also know that tech is evolving faster than we can imagine. And I, speaking for myself, don't really understand it. And I think I'm a little too old to really understand it. People younger and smarter than me are going to have to figure this out. But we need to be able to use tech as a tool to build and expand democracy, because right now it is in the hands of the other side. And I'm going to leave it at that because I don't really have any answers. But to walk away from tech, to walk away from what's happening in AI and social media and other communications is a mistake. We have to engage. We have to figure out our own tools and tactics that we can use. Now, the next piece is mobilization, direct action, protest. And what concerns me here is, to a great extent, in the 96 hours between the time, let's say 11:30 or so on election night, when East Coast time, when Trump was projected as the winner, within 96 hours, we really saw the media immediately rallying around this story that Trump won in a landslide, which is empirically not true. It is not just not true, it is disinformation, and disinformation to keep repeating it. But we also saw not the absence of protest, but that the major players, the institutional actors who in most countries would step up at this moment weren't. And that is chilling. Labor unions, faith-based organizations, other organizations that can mobilize large numbers of people. Nonetheless, there has to be a protest, direct action component to this. And that includes things like lots of big protests on the same day in cities. It includes creative ways to think about it. You know, the boycotts and the protests in front of the Tesla dealerships. Don't shop on February 28th, which is kind of a weird classist one, but it's not totally off course. This has to grow, this has to continue, and eventually the big players have to get involved. Otherwise, we're not going to win this one. Now, I want to just close with two more. And before I say that, I think that I am basing this analysis on three assumptions. And I hope you're with me on these three. First, and importantly, Trump and Musk are trying to destroy the American state. They are trying to destroy the United States of America. If you were tasked by Xi Jinping or Vladimir Putin to create an outline for how to weaken and destroy the United States, you could not have come up with anything better than this. So that's point one. And I realize I should have said this at the beginning. Point two, they are destroying American democracy. And point three, this is unlawful. They are doing it unlawfully. And if you agree on those 3 points, then it is essential that you understand that we have to think differently about how to stop this. Ultimately, you win elections in democracy with the 50% plus one of the vote. In the United States, because of the Electoral College and because of the US Senate, if you're a Democrat, you can make that 53%. You bring down non-democratic regimes with 70% of the people. That's the scope of the challenge. And we're not going to get there by marginally toying with who's a slightly better nominee. It's not going to work. So let me bring you to my last 2 points here. Because these to me are the most important and the ones that I kind of need to be fleshed out more. And the first is this. I was having a conversation with a Georgian friend of mine who had lost his job, his partner has lost her job, and the democracy movement in that country, and if you're following events in Georgia, it's been a pretty intense, about 15 weeks there, had lost a lot of its steam because USAID, again, if this is precisely what Putin wants, had canceled overnight all of their support for democracy activists, anti-corruption activists, free media in Georgia. And he said to me, so my Georgian friend speaking to me and another American colleague and another Georgian colleague on a call, and he says, I'm now behind enemy lines. You are on the front lines, you Americans. And of course, Ukraine has been in the news recently as well, and of course we're all stuck in these metaphors about the 1930s. But if we're going to be in that metaphor about the 1930s, Ukraine is Spain, right? Ukraine is Spain. And it's as if in the Spanish Civil War, Roosevelt had decided, you know what, I'm going to side with the fascists, right? That's what Trump has done. So the difference, the critical difference between the 1930s and today, I mean, obviously a lot of differences, but one is, in the 1930s, ultimately, the fight between democracy and fascism was between countries. Today, it is within countries. Therefore, it is absolutely essential to understand this in a different context, and therefore to build what I am calling transnational civil society movements. Movements across national borders, where we learn from each other, where we coordinate activities with each other, where we're able to share information with each other, where we're able to create new tech, use new tech, pool resources with each other. And this is extremely difficult for a country that has always been so inward-looking as the United States, and frankly, always had the privilege of doing that because we've kind of in our hearts assumed our wealth and our power and our stability was permanent, and it's not. So we have to begin doing that. And that's going to be very difficult, but it is essential. And it will also be, at the end of the day, a very, very important source of strength. Okay, I know I'm moving fast, but I have a lot here, and the last thing I would say is that, well, this isn't the last thing. I'm going to talk for a while, so forgive me. The last point I'm making, the seventh major strategy, is the following. The United States of America, as we all knew it, even if we weren't alive for this whole period, but we all read about it in books, from 1945 to 2015, was essentially one, particularly in the first half of that period, where democracy was substantially expanded. Second half of that period, the rise of the new right, but still a relatively stable, relatively democratic place. That country no longer exists. Let me rephrase that. The United States of America, as we knew it from 1945 to 2015, no longer exists. Therefore, if we want to defeat fascism, we can only do it by going forward. And here, I would caution against what I call the saint of circumstance trap, which is an allusion to a song by an old rock and roll band from my hometown of San Francisco. And the line that comes to mind is, sure don't know what I'm going for, but I'm going to go for it for sure. And we can't fall into that trap. And what I mean by that is the seventh point here, is we have to reimagine American democracy. We have to think about what American democracy 2.0 looks like. Because the option of going back to the halcyon days of the Tea Party and the Obama years doesn't exist. We can't get there. We have to think of what the next American democracy looks like. Some idea, and we have to be willing to think big, because what they want us to do is to think small. Hope and possibility are the natural allies of democracy. Fear and timidity are the natural allies of fascism. So, let's think about a democracy where all votes are treated equally, where money doesn't determine the outcome of elections, where we wrestle with the truth and reality of our own racial history. I don't know if we can ever get from here to there. I don't know. It is not, I think I've said it before in this room. In 1988, if you took a class on Soviet politics, it was a given that it would last forever. You started from that premise. By 1993, up the street at this university where I teach now, because I was there in grad school at the time, there were meetings and seminars on why the collapse of the Soviet Union, not why it happened, but why it was inevitable. I think we have to understand that if we think in terms of election cycles, we're giving in. We need to think in terms of decades and generations. So I have the cheat sheet if anybody wants it. I'll pass them around.
It may not be enough for everyone, so if you know and like your neighbor, share with them.
We have time for a few questions. And we see some Shoshana, you get the honors.
Oh, is it on? Okay. Hello.
Hi.
So I guess my question is, we talk about like things we can do long term, and obviously focusing on like the Republican Party, but also establishment like Democratic Party is holding on really, really tight to their, I guess, ineffective base right now. What are things that we can do to push the Democratic Party to take this seriously and actually do their job?
Well, the first thing I would say is that if we are looking for the Democratic Party to save us, that's just not going to happen. The Democratic Party, and that's not necessarily criticism. This is not the task that they've crafted and designed themselves to do. So on the one hand, in my heart, I say primary all these people. But there's another side of me that says that's not where we should be wasting our money or our time. I have a colleague who said it very succinctly: act as if the Democratic Party doesn't exist, because it kind of doesn't. So that would be my advice.
Hi, you mentioned earlier about the importance of technology. Could you be a little bit more specific about that? I'm not clear if you're talking about telecommunications or internet-related communications or virtual or other types of technology that might be relevant to this.
Well, the reason you're not clear is because I'm not clear either. Really, I don't know. But, you know, this movement on the other side gathered strength by taking control of new social media technology. Their kind of weird crypto, which is maybe not technology, the right word for that is a real engine of this. The kind of Muskian plan to destroy the government and tell people they're replacing it with AI. We're living in an age of enormous technological advances, or advances suggest positive forward movement, technological changes, and I just think we have to get some of that in service of our causes. And beyond that, I just don't know, which is why, I'm sorry, I'm disappointing you, but it's why I said people younger and smarter than me have to figure this out. But there's a tech component to this.
Hi, I'm just wondering if New York State, referencing the previous speaker, and the blue states they've already started separating or doing things together, the governors get together, and is that another way to start something, a model that could be used?
So I want to be clear here. The notion of states succeeding is a terrible idea. And the reason I'm from California, the reason I say this, we're going to secede because we're nice blue California. California produced more votes for Donald Trump than any state, right? Donald Trump's just going to let those military bases go. So breaking up in that way isn't going to work. I think there are a couple things we can do. The more that blue state governors begin to speak and coordinate and think through a strategy on this, the better. Gavin Newsom's strategy seems to be to chat away happily with Charlie Kirk and Steve Bannon. So I'm not sure that's really in the cards. And then I think ultimately this question of the previous speaker was discussing questions around tax revenue. And at some point, can the states not turn tax revenue over to the federal government? I think that's something we should legal minds should be exploring, because the blue states generate so much wealth. But I am deeply concerned about civil war, but I always tell people that Americans think of civil war and they think of the 1860s. Civil war in the 20th century looks very, very different. It's not two sides, it's many sides, it's widespread instability, it's the collapse of the economy. That's where they want to take this, it seems. But I don't think, I think we need to think, I think that I'll just leave it at that.
Two very quick questions. So you mentioned a 70% threshold for regime change. Donald Trump's approval ratings, I think, are hovering around 45% right now, which is alarming, and considering how many people are in the red states are hurt by his policies. And the other thing is the network state and Andreessen and all those things. It doesn't seem like people are talking about that in terms of, would his people, Trump's base, actually support these policies in this direction? It doesn't seem like that discussion is being had. Thank you.
So let me try to respond to that. I've always believed that if Trump's popularity gets to 30 or 35, down from 40 to 45, we're in a different world. But I don't think that's going to be easy. And I want to stress that, you're right, that a lot of his voters are taking an economic hit already because of what's going on. It's going to get worse. But remember, every time that the words DEI are struck from a website, they're getting something, right? The cruelty is not just the point. The cruelty is what his voters want. So his voters, and I disagree with the Jamie Raskins of the world who think this is about eggs. Harris and Biden ran around the country for a year saying these guys are fascists, and the American people chose that because they wanted it. So some of these things that we think of as, Lee Zeldin with his craziness around the environment, climate change is a hoax, Kash Patel threatening to arrest grantees who got money from the EPA to address climate change. For them, for many of Trump's voters, this is the good thing. This is what they want. So I'm hesitant to, now I forget what was your second point again? I'm sorry. Yeah. People aren't talking about it, but it is really seeping into the big picture strategy of what they're doing. And it is still a fringe thing. I mean, I spent 2023 and 2024, a lot of my effort focusing on this in San Francisco, where they really did try. And basically, they poured a lot of new tech money behind a candidate for mayor, and then old San Francisco money basically stepped in and said, and a man whose fortune goes back to the gold rush, family fortune goes back, this is San Francisco, the gold rush got elected mayor, right? So that's how we got rid of the tech network state, by just bringing the aristocrats back. But this is real. This is and it is worth understanding. And the network state, in very broad brush, is essentially to replace the kind of polity as we understand it with a polity run by, of, and for wealthy tech people. It's poorly thought out. It's not likely to happen in its entirety, but it's doing a great deal of damage already because this is what's driving so much of the tech money behind Trump. Go near that speaker.
Okay. I'm not standing in front of the speaker. I'm behind the column here. Okay. This is a tough question to formulate. You're right that technology is the key here. Okay. What we're not doing, and I don't know how, and maybe you might have a suggestion. I watch a lot of people on YouTube that are anti-Trump right now. The ones I'm watching are those for Ukraine. I'll mention some names: Jake Bro, combat veteran, and there are a few others. They're little guys that are making money off of the big media systems, okay? How do we get more of these guys paid by the big media who don't want to pay them, but they get paid, and we should be supporting them? What do you think we can do?
I don't think the strategy is to get the Washington Post to pay, to get money to progressive anti-Trump voices. I think the strategy is to build other platforms for those voices. I don't mean like YouTube, right? I mean a collective of progressive voices, right? But beyond that, we need to begin to think about like databases of who these voices are, right? Who can we trust on Ukraine? What newspaper, who's doing real reporting on this? Like that kind of thing, as well as just sharing information between each other. Right now, this is a longer discussion about media, which is also backward-looking, looking back to 2024. And I think we're at a couple of disadvantages here, right? One is the platforms that are really prominent, TikTok. TikTok is a Chinese spyware firm, right, that also does Chinese propaganda. Meta and X are owned by propagandists, not propagandists, but owned by backers of the regime. Google, which owns YouTube, is pretty much in that world as well. So the algorithms are never going to be helpful to us. And that's what I mean by the new tech. Like, what are we going to create that's going to be different than do this? And that's, I don't have the thought out plan, like I said. I'm just thinking what we need to be thinking about and how to get beyond this. How do we win the midterms? Look, if we have free and fair elections, we're going to win the midterms. And then what? Hakeem Jeffries is going to subpoena Elon Musk. He's not going to go. And then what? They're going to have an oversight meeting. No one's going to go. And then what? They're going to vote to impeach Trump, and it dies in the Senate. And then what, right?
Elizabeth, last question. Okay. You are the parent of 20-somethings, and you teach students. I'm the parent of 40-somethings raising children, and we're a bunch of seniors in this room. So what do you see as the generational dynamics in your multi-step plan?
It's always good to get such a short, concise, easy question when we're short on time. I think that generation of our children are going to have to lead the way on this tech stuff. But I think they also have a huge advantage. And I've been teaching on democracy, democratic rollback in the United States at Columbia since 2017. This year, This is all my students know. So you don't have to, in other words, because of their age, right? So you don't have to break down the myths that so many students over the years have brought into adulthood. They never, it was implausible from the beginning, right? And that is an advantage. I think this generation, I always push back against peers who speak about Gen Z, I think they're still Gen Z, as if like, oh, they have it easy. This generation has it so badly. I mean, when I was in high school, it was like there might be a nuclear war. Now they know the planet's going to be unlivable pretty soon, right? I mean, the climate change isn't a might, right? Their youth was messed with by COVID, and then they were kind of blamed for it, right? So there's a radicalism in there that for me is very encouraging. Frankly, it's not always channeled in directions that I think are helpful or positive. But it is also, these are really complicated questions because I think right now the right has done much better at exploiting that uncertainty and that concern and that anger. And we need to get better at speaking to those people because to go back to a baseball metaphor, the young people always win because they always get to bat last. Thank you. Thank you. It was a lot of fun.
So we'll be having Lincoln back again periodically to cheer us up and tell us what to do. In the meantime, I'm going to ask the board members to approach the front of the room. So I'm going to call the officers up first. Officers. Any officers over there? Okay, Tim, you're up next. Okay, everybody come closer. We can do this lickety-split and quick, okay? Come close to Tim.
Hello, everybody. My name is Tim Eckersley. Of all the dreadful things that have been happening recently, one hit me really hard personally this week, and that was the detention of the Columbia student who was a legal permanent resident. Now, until recently, I was in the same position. About 10 years ago, after living in New York for 30 years, I decided it was time to become a US citizen, mainly because I wanted to vote. But also, with the rise of Donald Trump at that time, I was concerned about my status as a green card holder. And 10 years later, those fears have been justified. So if you are kind enough to give me another term as a board member, I will do everything I can, and every little bit helps to thwart the machinations of our garbage-mouthed president. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tim. I'm Lois Safian, and I am Director of Special Events. So I want to let you know that we have a very special event coming up. On May 4th, we're going to have our annual fundraising event, and we're going to have some very exciting speakers. Our district attorney, Alvin Bragg, will be speaking and will be getting an award from us. And we're giving an award to a group that takes care of and deals with immigration. And it's going to be a lot of fun. So I hope you'll all join us you'll be getting some messages, emails and stuff. It's May 4th. And don't forget to vote for me, Lois Safian, on your ballot, okay? Thank you.
Yeah. So I'm Josh Pepper. I'm the membership director of this club. I've been a member of this club for a very long time, more than 20 years. I was membership director about 20 years ago and then became president and took a hiatus for a while, but I'm a membership director again. I'm running for another term, and thank you very much.
Hi, everyone. I'm Liza Cooper. I've been on the Three Parks board for the last year, and you might know me as the president of New Friends of Metro Theater, which I'm very happy to say Upper West Side Cinema Center has raised the $7 million to, so they hope to close on the theater in the next few weeks. If you read the West Side Rag, you might know me as the love coach of the Upper West Side, but I have worked in healthcare for 30 years, and so I believe in vaccines and science and Medicare and Medicaid and human rights, and I believe in the climate change as well as turning the lights on at Metro Theater. So would love to be elected again to the board. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. I'm Chuck Wall. I'm the corresponding secretary of the club. I joined the board in 2018, and since then I've helped organize and coordinate phone banks and postcard campaigns and sidewalk tables and canvassing trips to Democratic candidates for the 2018 midterms, the 2020 presidential election, and the 2022 midterms. In 2019, I became editor of the club monthly newsletter, and I now create and produce the issues of the monthly newsletter that I hope I try to make as informative as possible. And I also create all of the e-blasts that bring you news of the club in your inboxes. In this past fall, I was the co-manager of the storefront and did all kinds of stuff to keep that place working on a day-to-day basis. And right now, you can see me out on Broadway every weekend petitioning. So I look forward to being as active as I can be, and I would appreciate your vote too. It is not true. It is not true. I'm also going to speak for two club members who are not here tonight. First, Corinne Constantine, who is running again for member at large. Corinne, in 2020, coordinated phone banking for the Biden-Harris ticket and for the Georgia runoff election. She also participated almost every day in tabling on Broadway. In 2024, she was terrific at the storefront. She managed the finances and all the record keeping, and she also managed phone banking every single week, and she also chartered the buses that took volunteers to Pennsylvania. And Corinne was terrific, and I hope you can all vote for her as well. And the third person I'm going to speak for is Wendy Diller. And Wendy bills herself as a journalist and strategic communications consultant focused on the intersection of medicine, the life sciences, and business. What Wendy does is she keeps a close eye on the city and state legislative and fiscal activities and has invited experts, including Lauren Melodia, who was here tonight, to come to our meetings to speak to us on these topics. She was the one who developed crucial links to Democratic and progressive clubs out on Long Island and also in the Hudson Valley. And she arranged canvassing trips to those areas that many of you, I hope, participated in. In 2022, I can tell you from personal experience, I knocked on voters' doors on Staten Island with Wendy, and that was not easy. But we somehow got through it, and Wendy was terrific. Right now, she has become the leader of the club's newly formed Trump Resistance Committee. And she's focused in that committee on finding ways to combat the administration's damaging economical initiatives, budget cuts, and anti-immigrant policies, and on pressuring lawmakers to protect our city and state from the Trump administration. Wendy would be terrific for another term as well. Thank you all very much.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Ellen Flax. I am the treasurer of Three Parks Independent Democrats, so I have probably had dealings with just about everyone in the club. I'm the person who makes sure that we try to stay within budget, and we try to do as much as possible with the money that we have and trying to be a good steward of our funds. I'm also the person responsible for dealing with campaign finance stuff at the at the state level, which is a fun practice in and of itself. So I've been the treasurer now for, this is scary to say, since 1995. Besides counting money and doling out money, I've been involved with many different campaigns over the years. I've knocked on many doors, I've petitioned, I've done lots and lots of things, and I would be privileged to serve Three Parks as treasurer yet again. Thank you.
Hi, Lynn Max. I'm running again for second vice president. I've been privileged to be on the board of Three Parks for over 20 years, during which time I've co-managed a number of the campaign presidential storefronts, most recently part of the leadership team of the Harris-Walz campaign office. Also, like Chuck and others, been involved with many postcard campaigns, midterms, upstate canvassing trips, and a lot of issue campaigns, including our successful zoning campaign, anti-fracking, Indian Point, to name a few. I am hopeful, okay, that not all Trump voters, okay, are fascists. I am hopeful that they went to the grocery store and they decided they wanted somebody else. The most recent poll that I saw today said 56% of Americans, okay, are unhappy, okay, with the Trump administration's handling the economy. And let's face it, the man is crazy, okay? I mean, I think that all of us recognize that, and I think more people are recognizing that too. I'm very grateful to be part of the Three Parks family. I know that we will all continue to work for what we believe in, for our values, and to make the country and the world a better place. Thank you. I'm also quickly speaking for two people who couldn't be here. Irene Schreier, who is on vacation. She will be with us next week. She has been a club member for over 20 years, much of that time as a board member. Irene is somebody who always steps up. You need a bus captain, Irene will do it. Okay, you need somebody to help with the picnic, Irene will do it. She petitions, she's involved with all the campaign storefronts. She's a wonderful board member, and I hope you'll vote for her. The second person I'm speaking for is Barbara Futter, who came to New York City in December of 23, just a little over a year ago, from Nashville, where she was for over 30 years, being a legal aid attorney and working in various social justice organizations. She actually moved to 103rd and Central Park West, saw Three Parks picnic being planned and executed in the park, became a Three Parks member, and has been working ever since. She was a constant presence, okay, at our campaign storefront, whether it was driving people upstate to canvass, registering voters, being at tables, doing everything with enthusiasm and a lot of spirit and a great sense of humor. So I hope you'll vote for her too. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name's Doug Whalen. I'm running for another term as a board member at large, which I've been doing for 2 years now. Been a club member for a few years longer than that. Really just enjoyed participating in the club's activities, learning more about local politics, and I'd really love to have the opportunity to continue. Thanks.
Good evening. I'm Michael Stearns. I'm the recording secretary, which basically means I keep track of the board of directors meetings. So I write the minutes for those activities. I've been a member of the club since about 1990, and have participated in tabling on various streets. Gathering signatures for petitions for storefronts in 2016 and 2024, and done a lot of other nickel and dime jobs that come along. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Paul Freilich. I've been on the board for 1 year, been a member of the club for about 4. I'm from the Midwest originally. I've worked many years in communication agencies in New York and have a public health degree and try to focus a lot of my work in the health area. Working in the club, I've sort of been involved with many of the activities where we're helping various campaigns. I was active at the store during the last presidential campaign. And I'm also just trying to see how we can incorporate some new communication approaches into the way the club works, and hope to work with Liza on some social media techniques in the future. So, thank you.
My name is Marianne Marks, and I've been a club member for a long time, and I'm asking for your vote. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Sue Maderer. I've just been asked to be on the board as a member at large. I've been active in the storefront and petitioning. I'm an alternate judicial delegate and on the county committee. I'm asking for your vote. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Daniel Tzadok. I've been on this board since 2019. I helped with the tech support with phone banking with Corinne for the Harris Waltz campaign at the storefront with Dan Zweig as well from Broadway Dems. I've also been on the sound crew and the website committee, and I've also written some articles from the newsletter. One of the articles I wrote was about technology, and particularly the free software movement, which I encourage you to look into, and also Mastodon, which lets anyone and any institution run their own equivalent of Twitter, or better than Twitter. So those are some things that I think people should be aware of. We have a lot to work to do, most immediately on the mayoral campaign, and I hope to continue helping the club with this crucial work. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Rod Schneier. I'm running for the board at large. I've been involved in progressive politics since high school in the late 1950s, and I guess I've been a member of Three Parks since the first Obama campaign. Most recently, besides doing petitioning now, during the last campaign, along with my wife Faye. If you were at the storefront, you probably saw me there pretty much every day, all day long. And somehow I got roped in to running for this. But I think it's just so important that we act locally and try to stop the fascist onslaught, and I'm asking for your vote. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Miriam Raban, and I'm asking for your support to continue to serve on the Three Parks Board and to work to sustain its progressive values, which is why I joined quite a few years ago. I'm part of the Trump Resistance Committee. I have a special interest in protecting immigrants. And I want to work with the board to counter the dangers posed by the Trump administration. I continue to be interested in voting rights, affordable housing, and campaigning for progressive candidates. I've connected members of Three Parks to campaigns in the 19th Congressional District. I think some of you know we won for Antonio Delgado, and more recently we flipped the 19th Congressional District back to blue with Josh Riley. And I also help with Three Parks activities. Hope you join us in petitioning, tabling, and other work that needs to be done. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Steve Max, running for another term on the board. I'm a Bernie Sanders socialist. It's now clear that that program is the way forward for the Democratic Party, which, contrary to what you may have heard, does in fact exist. I'm on the sound crew. I'm the webmaster. I was on the full-time staff of the campaign storefront for 2 months. Just about everything that my wife Lynn Mack said she did, we did together, so I'm not going to repeat all of those things. And I do hope you'll vote for me. One last thing, there are pink flyers in the back. Lynn, would you hold one up? And those flyers say, join us, and everybody should take one or two of those home with you and give them to somebody who could use it. Thank you.
Thanks to everybody. What a hardworking bunch. Those of you who came to the storefront saw almost everybody. I'm going to speak on behalf of Lorraine, but before I do, I'd like you to give it up for Lorraine, because even though she couldn't be here tonight, Lorraine has been the heart and soul of Three Parks for the last 5 years. She joined in 2019 after retiring as a professional fundraiser. She came in on the Obama-Biden campaign, then joined the board and served as corresponding secretary, newsletter editor, events coordinator. She was elected president in 2019, led the club through COVID, right, online, just amazing work from her. She's grateful to have had the opportunity to serve as board president for 5 years and looks forward to remaining involved as VP. She is convinced that Three Parks is what keeps her sane during these brutal political times. That leaves me. I'm Danielle Gerard. Right now, I'm first vice president. I'm running for president. I've been president before. I've run the fundraiser. I've been involved in a bunch of storefronts. I'm a senior staff attorney at Children's Rights, where we advocate on behalf of children in state systems. I love Three Parks. All of you are fantastic. So I hope that you will vote for me and ensure another term for me. Thank you very much. So now we're all going to vote. Has everybody voted? If you haven't voted, please make sure you put your ballots in. Dan Cohen's going to pick up the bag. By the time he walks from here to there, you need to have voted, because he's going to count the ballots and tell us the results in a record 6-minute time.
And while people are voting, I just want to say how proud I am of this organization and the terrific work that it does. The meetings and all of our activities, the petitioning, the storefront is all done by an army of volunteers. Many of you are involved, and thank you for participating. So now, as I've stalled for time for just a little bit longer, if you haven't voted, now is your moment.
Okay, everybody, listen up. Dan Cohen informs me that we have the entire slate has been unanimously and overwhelmingly reelected. We are adjourned. Thank you for your time and patience. But anyway, we're back. Well, you were going to support Scott, or you weren't sure?